John Cadis here from the LA County Coroner's Office. He's been an investigator with that office for longer than many of us have been barred, speaking at least for myself. And I tracked him down after he gave probably the most helpful and informative presentation at the Scuba Show last year. And I thought he would be a great person to come and talk to LADL because, of course, we all have those occasional F cases, and a lot of times it's our first time doing one. And so really knowing more about how the coroner's office works, what goes into those reports, and what we can ask of them and what kinds of information we can get from them, I thought would be really helpful. Please feel free to pipe up with questions throughout, but please make sure that you grab one of the microphones that are situated at 3 different places along this table, so that the folks in Lancaster can hear you and hear your questions and understand what the response is. All right, take it away. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Oh, good afternoon. Thanks for having me in. When Amy first approached me some time ago to do a presentation for all you folks, kind of dusted off some of my old PowerPoint presentations, and I tried to come up with a really good, I hope, some topics that will be helpful for all of you, but I think the key thing here is really about asking questions. As I go through this material, this is your time and this is your opportunity to ask away about anything you're not sure about. One of my challenges at the coroner's office that seems to be continual is, despite our best efforts and no matter how much we try and be communicative and get the word out to the people on the street, so to speak, our challenge is trying to convince the rest of the world what we actually do or what we cannot do. And admittedly, the challenges come from television shows and movies, but there is a presumption or there is an expectation from the community we serve and the law enforcement agencies we work with. Well, aren't you going to do that? It doesn't, and a lot of times the answer is no. I'm sorry, that's not how things happen. So, again, please ask questions as I go through this material. By way of introduction, well, first of all, does anybody remember this incident? This was a couple years ago. This was down on the 5 freeway, I think northbound the 5 freeway near Griffith Park, and a solo vehicle accident. Vehicle traveling at freeway speed, not necessarily excessive freeway speed, just going at about 75 to 80 like we all do. Driver lost control, he was ejected, and the driver ended up here. The laser pointer doesn't work too well, but right there on the Colorado Street side, that white sheet, that is our victim.
Oh, wow.
That gives you a strong indication of what can happen in a traffic fatality. And when I give trainings to paramedic classes, first responder classes, I tell them, hey, if you're going to a vehicle incident and you can't seem to find a victim, don't forget to look up. Look in the trees, look on top of the 1st-story building, look on top of the 2nd-story building if you're not finding anybody. So also, just a friendly reminder to the community, when you are driving, wear your seatbelt and slow down a little bit, because we don't want to have to come get you off the top of the Colorado Street sign. So now, in way of introduction, the coroner's office here in Los Angeles County. What we are is an investigative agency. We are a standalone independent coroner's office, county department. We are responsible for looking into the cause and manner of any sudden, unexpected, or unnatural death. For the coroner to take jurisdiction of a case, there has to be some suspicion of foul play, trauma, drugs, illegal conduct contributing to the death or surrounding the death for us to get involved. And you're primarily looking at homicides, suicides, drug overdoses, and traffic accidents. We automatically take jurisdiction of those cases. We also will look into any case of natural death, or what appears to be a case where someone passed away or succumbed to a naturally occurring event or a naturally occurring disease when we can't find a doctor to sign a death certificate. We call those unattended deaths. Okay? In California, if a person has died and their doctor has seen them within 20 days of the death, their doctor may sign the death certificate. if they have an opinion that the death is due to natural causes. State law says it has to be 20 days. Here in Los Angeles County, we've busted that out to 6 months. Private physician may sign their patient's death certificate if they've seen him within 6 months of the death. Other jurisdictions have busted that out even further to maybe a year, in some places a year and a half. But here in Los Angeles, a doctor can sign the death certificate within 6 months. Some other things that are reportable to us that we look into: if you have someone who dies while they are detained, in custody, on a 5150 hold, even if they die of a naturally occurring disease, maybe they're dying of a terminal illness, we still investigate those deaths. If you have a suspected contagious disease where there could be a risk to the public health, the coroner will investigate those cases. Can anybody think of a disease that might be of interest? Sure. But a quick footnote on those. If someone dies of a disease like coronavirus, Ebola, or something else that's really a problem for public health, chances are the coroner wouldn't take jurisdiction necessarily, because those are naturally occurring diseases. If someone were to die from coronavirus, they probably would be in a hospital and have a long stay with a great deal of treatment, and their physician would sign the death certificate as coronavirus, and we probably wouldn't get involved. If you have a patient who resides in a state hospital or a state facility, these are generally people who have been determined to be criminally insane, and this is where they go to live out their lives. And when they finally do pass away, usually of natural causes, the coroner investigates their deaths as well, because they're kind of in custody at that point. And also, if you have a death occurring within 24 hours of some type of a surgical procedure or a general anesthetic is used, we investigate those cases as well. I'm going to put this up here. This is a bit of gobbledygook, and this is really for physicians who have if they have a problem or they're hesitant about signing a death certificate, or should I report this to the coroner or not. It basically makes a distinction between reportable cases and cases that are actually under the jurisdiction of the coroner. You've got your handouts there, it's written there. It's helpful, but I'm not going to go into it too much. The point here is the coroner has a great deal of discretion into what cases we take jurisdiction over and what level of inquiry we have to go into. And we try and encourage physicians, if attending physicians who are taking care of their patients, if you have an informed medical opinion as to the cause of your patient's death, what they died from, please sign their death certificate. And it's also worth mentioning when we counsel doctors and say, doctor, you may sign the death certificate, you don't have to be proof positive. A private physician only needs to document a probability. What did your patient probably die from? It's not proof positive, it's not beyond a shadow of doubt. Give us an opinion, and we can move forward. Okay? This is worth mentioning here if anybody is practicing their craft, law, or whatever you're doing outside the Los Angeles County. As you go from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, coroner type business, medical examiner, death investigation, little different as you go from place to place. Little different as you go across jurisdictional lines. But in California, it is county by county how you want to do it. And this is a map of California, and the counties you see up there that are all outlined in white, the vast majority of counties in California, there's 58 of them. The counties in white, those are all sheriff coroner counties. That means that the sheriff is also the coroner for that county. Counties that are outlined in black, Los Angeles, Inyo, Fresno, Calaveras, Sacramento, San Mateo, and actually now even Santa Clara County, those are counties that have their own standalone independent coroner's office. We here in Los Angeles have no affiliation with the Sheriff's Department. We kind of like it that way, no offense. But that's kind of rare in California. The counties in gray, you see San Diego, Ventura, and Little San Francisco County. Those are medical examiner counties. So what does this mean? California state law basically says it's up to each county to decide who do you want to be held ultimately accountable for cause and manner of death. State law says that can be basically one of three people. It can be your sheriff, who is an elected official, highest law enforcement authority in the county. That can be a coroner, who may or may not be a doctor, may or may not be an elected official, or you can have that be a medical examiner, who is a doctor. One system isn't superior to another. That's just the way California state law says you can do it. We here in Los Angeles pretty much have the best of both worlds. Dr. Jonathan Lucas is the Chief Medical Examiner Coroner for the County of Los Angeles, and the County of Los Angeles passed an ordinance a long time ago saying the coroner for Los Angeles County shall also be a doctor. That's great. We have best of both worlds. So just a little background on how things are done in California. And as you go from state to state, a little bit different. Roles and responsibilities are the same. The job titles, classifications, what we're trying to accomplish, those are all the same. Okay? Some more fun facts about our office. We cover the entire county of Los Angeles, solid 5,000 square miles, including Palmdale, Lancaster, West Los Angeles, Long Beach, Santa Catalina Island, and San Clemente Island. So we cover a lot of territory. We work with well over 60 law enforcement agencies, well over 100 hospitals, probably 250 mortuaries and funeral homes. These are the people who call us on the phone every day and say, hey, I've got this dead body, what do I do now? So we work with them very closely. We normally employ about 250 people. So we're a small county department in relation to the other departments, but we got a lot on our plate. We've got a lot of responsibility with only 250 people to do the work. And another interesting bullet point, we investigate about 500 John Doe and Jane Doe cases every year. That's how many unidentified bodies come in annually, over 500. And interestingly enough, by the end of the year, we've identified all but maybe 20. And we continue to try and identify those folks. So a lot of stuff you see on television and in the news about cold case investigation and DNA evidence is actually very, very real. It's kind of an exciting time to be involved in this sort of business because we're starting to identify John Does and Jane Does from a very long time ago. DNA evidence, DNA technology, DNA science is getting better all the time. There's a new term that the public is hearing, relatively new, on the news. They're hearing the term familial DNA. Okay, familial DNA is being used to capture serial killers and serial rapists. The Golden State Killer was caught with familial DNA. Lonnie Franklin Jr. was recently tried and convicted of the murders of 11 women here in Southern California, in Los Angeles. He was the Grim Sleeper. So a little bit of controversy there. Is it too invasive? Should we be allowing people to search 23andMe for the relatives? Right now we can here in California, but what you're not hearing is the other good part of that controversy is that coroners and medical examiners are using that same familial DNA to identify the John Does and Jane Does. A couple of years ago we had some really good press. We identified a Jane Doe from 1969. We think she might have been a victim of the Manson family. We tracked down her family in Canada, worked with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, got a DNA swab. We had photographs of her face from 1969. She was found up on the Mulholland Highway with multiple stab wounds right about the time Charlie Manson and his people were going crazy. Cold case, never identified. The family in Canada were looking at the photographs and saying, I think that's her, that might be her, but we're not sure. And we put it together. LAPD took credit for that, but that was all us. And the other DNA exciting thing that you might have heard about in the news, 60 Minutes did a pretty good expose on it, I think about maybe a year ago now. Rapid DNA. That sound familiar? Rapid DNA? Rapid DNA is a new technology. It's basically a new machine where we can get DNA identification on specimens put into this machine. It's about the size of a Betamax. Those of you who don't know what a Betamax is, I get it, but it's about this big. Similar technology where you slide something in, and we can get a DNA profile on specimens in 45 minutes to an hour. And the machine can be used by a non-technical operator, not a scientist. Anybody in this room, I can train how to use this machine, and you can run DNA. And it's really helpful for us in body identification. Rapid DNA was used to identify the fire victims up in Paradise, California last year. And more recently, the Santa Barbara dive boat, the Conception dive boat disaster. Those victims were all identified using rapid DNA. And you didn't hear about this in the news, but the helicopter crash we had in Calabasas, we used rapid DNA to identify those victims. Where normally it would take weeks or months to do that, we're now having it done in hours. So stay tuned for further developments. It's kind of exciting. Here's some fun facts about Los Angeles County. We have a population of about 10 million people. And every year, whether we like it or not, we can expect to see 60,000 of us die. That's kind of a statistical imperative. Population of 10 million, modern Western industrialized nation, healthcare, 911 system, adequate food, relatively clean water. This is normal, 60,000 deaths every year. And interestingly enough, of those 60,000 deaths that are occurring, only about 20,000, only about a third are reportable to the coroner because they're sudden, unexpected, unnatural, no doctor to sign the death certificate. That's how many phone calls we get from hospitals, mortuaries, and law enforcement. 20,000, a third, are reportable to us. And right off the bat, of those 20,000 intakes, received reports, we reject half. 10,000 of those cases we say, no thank you. Send the body to a funeral home or mortuary. We are declining to take jurisdiction at this time. The coroner has that authority in California. We can decline to take a case even though it is under our jurisdiction. There's nothing wrong with that. We do it a lot. We do it 50% of the time. That leaves us with about 10,000 cases to actually investigate. We make it official. We will write a report. We will do some level of inquiry. That's how many case numbers we issue every year, 10,000. But from those 10,000 cases, we're only doing about 6,500 autopsies. So the take-home message, when you look at all those numbers, number one, we're very busy. But more importantly, if a death has occurred someplace, keep in mind, you've only got about a 1 in 3 chance that the coroner has jurisdiction over the death. And then maybe only about a 1 in 8, 1 in 9 chance that an autopsy is going to be performed on the body by the coroner. The reality is that the vast majority of people who die are elderly. Their death is not sudden or unexpected. They're in a clinical setting, they're under a doctor's care, they're not doing well. Friends and family are at bedside right around the time of death, and they can go directly to a funeral home or mortuary after they pass away, and the coroner has nothing to do with it. And the coroner would have no record of that death. And equally important, if the coroner has taken jurisdiction and has brought the body to our facility, doesn't automatically mean autopsy. Okay? When families object to autopsy for personal reasons or religious reasons, we usually work with them. We usually resolve it to their satisfaction, but we're very good at convincing them you probably want one, you probably need one, and here's why, and they usually see it our way. But if they're dead set against it, they're opposed to it, we need to do one, we will. We don't need their permission, but we're not required to do an autopsy every time. Interestingly enough, in California, there's only one type of death that requires the coroner to perform an autopsy. There's a state law that says the coroner must in this type of death. Does anybody know what type of death that is? Mandatory, by statute. The coroner shall inquire into this type of death if you suspect it.
Child, baby?
Child, baby, you're getting warmer?
Murder?
Not murder. No. Not SIDS. Sudden infant death syndrome, crib death. If you have an infant 1 year of age or younger and there's no other obvious apparent cause of death or no other explanation, the coroner must take jurisdiction and shall perform an autopsy. Only in a case of suspected crib death or sudden infant death syndrome. Private physician cannot sign a death certificate saying the baby died from SIDS. The health department will not accept it. That's law. Interesting. We have a question up front.
For non-SIDS deaths of minors, how would you say the numbers shake out in terms of what proportion of those you investigate and do autopsies on?
Yeah, we will work with families, again, if they're opposed to autopsy for personal reasons or religious reasons. But when you have a minor child or you have an infant who has died and there is no apparent explanation, there is no diagnosed medical problem, there isn't anything to hang our hat on. You know, when children pass away or die, it's tragic, but usually if they're dying from natural causes, they've had a long stay in a hospital, like Children's Hospital. There's been a diagnosis, there's been an abundance of treatment trying to save the child's life. And when they pass away, there's usually a doctor that's going to say, this is what the child died from, they're signing the death certificate. We don't have to get into the coroner. Unless we really don't know, whether they throw up their hands and can't explain it. So most juvenile cases, even when families are dead set against it for religious reasons, we're probably going to do an autopsy, unless there's something else we can hang our hat on, if you will, to give an informed medical opinion. You had your microphone up. I think you wanted to ask a question.
Yes, I have a question. You stated earlier that there are some instances where you encourage families as to why they would want an autopsy. Can you give some examples of why that would be?
For example,
And also, I'm sorry.
Yes,
also,
go ahead.
In addition, is it relative to the age of the deceased?
it can be relative to the age of the deceased, yes. But usually when I'm counseling a family and saying, you know, here's why we've taken jurisdiction, because there's no doctor to sign or there's something going on there, and families, of course, are very emotional. I don't touch them. I don't want you to do anything. I say, okay. You do understand that if this is an accidental death, not having an autopsy could have an effect on your ability to get insurance money later. I would say something like, you know, we'll try not to do an autopsy. We'll do a limited autopsy. But if you want to hold somebody accountable for why this person died, child or otherwise, you know, an autopsy is a really good idea. Also, one thing I would mention to the family, you know, I think we know what happened here. I understand your loss. This is tragic, but I'd hate to have somebody come back years after the fact and accuse you of something. Let us do an autopsy to rule out any other possibility of something else, so there's not going to be that hanging over you. This is good information to have. Those are some of the things I bring up when I'm talking to a family. And explain to them, the other thing I explain to them is, you know, even if we do a full autopsy, I know that's a scary word. I don't say autopsy, we say postmortem examination. You don't want to use the A word, but I remind them, you know, if you want to have a viewing later, that's not going to prevent you from seeing them. You can still have an open casket ceremony, even though we do a complete autopsy. So those are some of the things that I bring to play when I'm trying to convince a family. It's kind of a good idea And they usually see it our way. Yes, ma'am.
Is there like a set criteria? Is there a set criteria for ruling out the 10,000 death, or do you think?
There's not a set criteria. It is a judgment call on our part, but a lot has to do with the dates of attendance. That doctor seeing the patient between 20 days or 6 months, or some other thing that is, is a concern. So it is a judgment call. A lot of things have to do with, well, has this person been diagnosed at one time with a traumatic brain injury? Have they been diagnosed with some other disease that is potentially lethal or catastrophic? So a lot of things come into play. So most of the time, it is an elderly person who is passing away. There's no indication of any criminal conduct. There's no indication of anything else going on there. So we will reject. Now, when families don't like that, they want an autopsy, they want us to take jurisdiction, we try and steer them in the direction of private pathology services. Private companies can do an autopsy. Most funeral homes, funeral directors have lists of companies that families can hire to do private autopsy. They're all legitimate, they're all above board, particularly when families have issues about, well, could there be a hereditary thing here? Did I inherit something from a parent that could affect me or my grandchildren later? Those types of questions come into play, and generally speaking, that's not something the coroner is going to address for them. Yes, ma'am.
So many times we're waiting for the coroner's report. Traditionally, how long would it usually take to get, let's say, the autopsy results? And is there any way to expedite, or is there any requests that we should be making in order to expedite those reports?
Very good question. I've got a slide coming up. So
Okay. And then I have one more question too after that.
Okay, great. So kind of moving along here, if the bodies are brought into our facility for a post-mortem examination, we put them in this room here. This is our refrigerated crypt. Today's a very typical day for us. We have about 450 bodies in storage. That's a little higher number than we'd like to see, because technically our crypt capacity is at about 500. So if we had an emergency right now, like a disaster, mudslide, mass shooting, we've only got about a 50 body buffer, and then we have to start taking steps to make sure we have the right amount of capacity. So we do have plans to address that, but 450 bodies, that's a little higher number than I like to see, and unfortunately it's kind of a sign of the times. Families are finding it harder and harder to come up with the funds for burial or cremation. That's all expensive. Under California state law, if a body has been in our care for 30 days or more, it's considered abandoned, and we can cremate with or without the family's permission. But if the family asks for more time, we always give it to them. But things just sort of linger here longer than they should. I'll talk a little bit more about county disposition, what can happen to a body that's unclaimed. And I think maybe some of your clients have to go down that path from time to time when a death has occurred, and that's sometimes their only option. So I'll give you some more details about a county cremation or county disposition. If the body needs to have a postmortem examination, we do it in a room like this. We call this an autopsy suite. Interestingly enough, it has multiple dissection stations set up. Today was a very typical day for us. We probably did close to 26 autopsies. Here's some other responsibilities of our department. These are mandated by statute pretty much. Positively identify the decedents, as I mentioned. DNA is a great tool, but most of the bodies that come in we identify through fingerprints or other methodology. And it's worth mentioning, going back one picture, or a couple pictures, this is how our facility is set up. We are a forensic science center. We are in the business of determining cause and manner of death. We don't have the ability to allow viewing or visitation. Okay. Families come to us all the time demanding to see their loved one, insisting to see their loved one. They think they must identify them in person. They're the only one who can do it, and that's just not so. Most of the cases that come in are identified by fingerprints. In a rare instance, we may show a facial photograph of the body to a family member or loved one, or a person who knew them in life, and they sign a form, and that's a positive ID. Okay? They want to see their loved ones, but we say, I'm sorry, this is not an appropriate place. I don't have any area you can go to. Please select a funeral home or mortuary and have your loved one picked up from us as soon as possible. Right now, a case comes in, we can complete it and get it ready for release to a mortuary in about 1 to 2 days. And that's pretty good. Gives families some time to make those decisions and make a selection. And that's where we say, that's a more appropriate place to see your loved one, not here. I'm very, very sorry. Notification of the legal next of kin. We are mandated by law to track those people down and give them that horrible news, even when the decedent is estranged from the family, maybe doesn't want to have any contact with the family, maybe they haven't seen them in 30 years, we still have to do our due diligence, track them down and notify them. We do protection of the personal assets effects, not just the money in the wallet or the purse or the jewelry, it's the person's estate. As big or as small as it might be, when they die suddenly or unexpectedly, who's going to take control of all that stuff, including real estate, vehicles, pets? That stuff needs to be taken care of. Of course, we determine the manner and cause of death, and we prepare the reports and we maintain all the records. So, a couple of things about autopsy reports. Coroner reports are work product, the stuff we do. Interestingly enough, coroner reports, autopsy reports, the reports you get from us are not confidential. They're in the public realm. Anyone can obtain our reports. They're not free. They cost $47. Do we charge you? Or do we give them to you for free, or do you know? I don't know. DCFS gets them to you? We may charge DCFS, I don't know. But you can get an autopsy report. You do not need to show a relationship to the deceased. You don't need to show a need-to-know basis. They are in the public realm. So if you want to get the autopsy report for Carrie Fisher, or Tom Petty, or Mini-Me, or a total stranger, a co-worker, you can obtain them. They're not confidential. And reports, autopsy reports, generally speaking, time frames on when they're available. If our doctor comes to an informed medical opinion as to the cause and manner of death at the conclusion of the examination on that day, it will take some time until that's transcribed and available, not too long. But generally speaking, even, and particularly with juvenile cases, almost always I can guarantee our doctors are going to defer until they get lab results and test results back. And that can include toxicology, that can include neuropathology, there may be another consultation. The way it goes down is a doctor does a post-mortem examination, gets a lot of good information, but then asks for tests. Toxicology, radiology consult, neuropathology consult, all this information and testing information comes in at the same time or at different times, and our doctor puts that all together and says, okay, I now have an informed medical opinion as to the cause of death. And that's why the answer is 4 to 6 weeks. But sometimes sooner, sometimes later. Each case is a little different. Admittedly, juveniles, children, might take a little longer. So, and even in the situation where the doctor says, okay, today I'm done and I have an informed medical opinion as to the cause of death, I have signed the death certificate, that official report still needs toxicology to come in, and that takes 4 to 6 weeks. So the full package, if you will, is not complete until all those other test results come in. The doctor is requesting toxicology, but already has an informed medical opinion. Toxicology would be interesting after the fact, 4 to 6 weeks, but the case is closed at that point. We can give you that information over the phone. You can obtain the death certificate through normal channels. It's out there, unless it's a security hold case. But I think that answers your question. And what was the follow-up to that one?
The follow-up is for SIDS cases. What are some signs that that you would see that would show that it's not SIDS, but it would be something like smothering or suffocation? I guess what are some symptoms you would see? Because I think many times we'll see the report that says that the death is undetermined, which usually I think means it's SIDS, because it could be a cause of death.
It's a little bit of a controversial issue because you're seeing fewer and fewer SIDS diagnoses locally and pretty much across the country. A little controversial, but a big body of scientists, researchers, people in the know are coming out and saying, you know what, I think sudden infant death syndrome might have been a myth all along, but what you're seeing across the country is infant mortality is pretty much staying the same, but diagnosed SIDS cases are dropping off because pathologists, doctors, scientists are getting more sophisticated in their processes, autopsies, examinations, and we're now finding more and more explanations for why these babies might be dying. We're doing much more comprehensive investigations than we've ever done before. Unfortunately, we are seeing more and more cases of unsafe sleep practices, co-sleeping. Those are tough cases to deal with. So to answer your question, is there something that shows, as opposed to SIDS, something else? It's like the same things we're looking for: co-sleeping, overlays, some type of trauma, toxicology. We bring everything to bear to try and speak intelligently about the cause and manner of this death. And you will see on some death certificates in some cases closed out as sudden unexpected infant death, as opposed to sudden infant death syndrome. A little bit controversial because if a case is closed out as sudden infant death syndrome, that's considered a natural death. When we close out a case saying sudden unexpected infant death, it's not natural. It's undetermined, and it leaves the door open for future prosecution, but that doesn't provide closure for the family. I think I'm answering your question, so that's kind of a tough one. There's a question back here.
So what would cause a security hold for a particular injury case?
Security hold is put on a case at the request of the law enforcement agency. That is what triggers us to put a case on security hold. The justification is the law enforcement agency gives us written notification to request that the case be put on a security hold because it could impede or hinder their ongoing criminal investigation. Very common to see a security hold case be put on an officer involved or deputy involved shooting, or an in-custody death, not because they're trying to hide something, but they are talking to witnesses and doing an investigation along with the district attorney, and they don't want any preliminary information released because if a witness contacts them and says, here's what I saw, and they know, okay, you are a credible witness because that's what we saw in the autopsy. That's the justification.
Is it ever removed?
They are removed eventually, on most cases. Some cases, never. Nicole Brown Simpson and Ronald Goldman, their cases are on security hold still, and were placed on security hold by a judge, so only a judge will take them off security hold. Other law enforcement agencies, we keep them, you still want this? It's been 90 days, and they say, okay, here's another request for security. It's been 90 days, another security hold? Yes, here's a request. So we stay on top of them. Good questions. Okay. Let's see, where are we going now? Laboratory analysis of all specific physical, medical, or biological evidence. That includes toxicology, which can take 4 to 6 weeks. And we investigate all the deaths that fall under our jurisdiction. So quick question for the class. How many coroners are there in Los Angeles County?
250. 250?
250?
Well, 250 employees.
How many coroners?
One, sorry.
One. Very good. Dr. Lucas is the coroner, just like there's only one sheriff. Mr. Villanueva is the sheriff for Los Angeles County, and he is the only sheriff, and all those other people are his deputies, deputy sheriffs. There's only one coroner, and I am one of Dr. Lucas's deputy. I am a deputy coroner. Similar system, right? One person, one head honcho. We do have a website. If you haven't checked it out already, it's a public website, nec.lacounty.gov. Lots of good information on it. You can look up case information, causes of death are there, paperwork, frequently asked questions. You can look up press releases. There's some historical information there about reports we've given to the county boards of supervisors going back to the early 1900s. It's kind of interesting. If you haven't looked at it recently, please do. I didn't mean to walk out of camera. I'm sorry. Okay. Something that's kind of unique to our department, it's sort of a little bit of a, rallying point, something to cheer about. We have a computed tomography scanner, a CT scanner. Kind of unique in the United States. There's only 4 coroner offices in the United States that have their own CT machine. There's us here in Los Angeles, there's Albuquerque, New Mexico, Baltimore, Maryland, and Dover Air Force Base. We are only one of 4 places that does a CT scan on a dead body. Very unique, very rare in the United States. CT scans on cadavers much more prevalent in Europe and Asia, not so much in the United States. The reason we got this CT machine, it was donated to us to help some of those families who are opposed to autopsy for religious reasons. We do a CT scan, we can rule out certain diseases, we can rule out some injuries. It makes the option of not doing an autopsy a little bit more palatable, or we tell families we'll do a CT scan if we see something suspicious, we're going to move forward with an autopsy. CT does not replace autopsy, but it's a really good tool to have for a number of different reasons. It also we can see other diseases and injuries that we might miss during an autopsy, so this is kind of cool stuff. Here are some of the personnel that work at the coroner's office, included in that 250. Investigators like myself, we're the hands, eyes, and ears of the pathologists in the field. We are the ones who write that investigative narrative that you're used to seeing. Our forensic attendants, those are our uniformed coroner personnel you're used to seeing in the field. You see them on television a lot driving the marked coroner vans. They assist our investigators in the field, and they transport the bodies in. They do a lot of the work in our crypts and body releases. Autopsy technicians are the ones who are assisting our doctors in the postmortem examinations. Criminalists, these are our toxicologists and evidence experts. These are the ones who also will collect a sexual assault kit on a case when requested. We have forensic photographers working in our photo studio, photographing the cases. Evidence custodians are the ones who are in charge of all the evidence we collect. And of course, the deputy medical examiners, these are the board certified forensic pathologists who do the autopsies. So this is kind of who's who in the zoo, if you will. So each individual plays a part in a death investigation and writes a certain report. So everyone has a different role and a responsibility. And many times I get called into court as the investigator on a case, and I'm sworn in and I'm asked to please describe the stomach contents. I'm not the doctor, the doctor did the, so take your time to familiarize yourself when you look at our written product and our reports and you need to talk to somebody or depose somebody or subpoena them, know who it is you really need to talk to. Okay, particularly in the realm of, and I mentioned the criminalists collect a sexual assault kit. Anybody here ever read a report on a sexual assault kit, what it looks like? Very interesting document. Our criminalists collect the evidence for a sexual assault kit. Somebody else writes the report, usually at the sheriff's or LAPD crime lab, and says, here's what our findings are on the evidence collected from the kit. And then our doctor gives an opinion as to any sexual trauma. Different stuff. Okay, so if you need to have someone to testify, know who's doing what. Criminalists collect the kit. Different laboratory prepares the report, and the doctor says that here are the signs, or there is no findings when it comes to sexual trauma. Okay? All the investigators like myself, we are peace officers for the state of California. California Penal Code Section 830.35 is where we get our authority. And at the end of the day, I think I mentioned this before, what we are trying to do is answer two questions. What is the cause of death, and what is the manner of death? Okay? And when we close out a case, what we are expressing to the world is an informed medical opinion. Do we have enough information to support an informed medical opinion? Do we have enough evidence to support an informed medical opinion? And we say, here it is. Take it or leave it. We don't necessarily have to convince you. So if one of my doctors says this is a homicide, that is a doctor's informed medical opinion. Not necessarily proof positive, not beyond the reasonable doubt. It is the doctor's informed medical opinion. And when our doctors say homicide, what we are saying is death at the hands of another. Not a degree, not manslaughter, not PC 187. We're saying death at the hands of another. So that's information that we think the world needs to have. Prosecutors, defense attorneys, that's the information we're providing to you. Okay? And one of the things that keeps coming up, families come to us all the time, call us on the phone and say, hey, we need a death certificate. The coroner does not give out death certificates. We sign death certificates. If somebody wants a death certificate, they need a death certificate, we say, you should go to your funeral director and get a certified copy of a death certificate. The coroner signs them. We sign them electronically, but we don't distribute them. We don't issue them. If someone needs an actual death certificate, they should go to their funeral director. If they want a death certificate and they don't want to go to the funeral director, or they can't for whatever reason, normal channels for a death certificate, if that's what you need, or that's what you want, the death has been within the past 90 days, death certificate can be obtained through the health department. If it's been more than 90 days since the death certificate is obtained through the registrar recorder. And I tell families who come and want that autopsy report, and I tell them the same thing like I told you, I'm so sorry, toxicology takes 4 to 6 weeks. What I tell families is before you come to us and buy that report for $47, I strongly suggest you get the death certificate first. Take a look at it. Death certificate is going to show you a lot of good information. It'll list the cause of death. It'll list any underlying conditions or factors in the death. If there was an injury, it will tell you where the death occurred and how it occurred. Most of the time that answers families' questions is the death certificate. If they're still not happy, they can get that complete autopsy report, and you've all seen those autopsy reports, and people have trouble making heads or tails of it. They see something like, well, the right kidney weighs 140 grams, the left kidney weighs 200 grams, the heart weighs 310 grams. What does that mean? Okay, so most of those reports, you look at the doctor's autopsy report, it's really the last page that has the informed medical opinion as to the cause and manner of death, and it looks an awful lot like what you see on a death certificate. It's almost the same information. Okay. Here's some legal stuff. I'm just going to touch on this briefly. Government Code Section 27491.2. Basically, this is the law that says I, as a deputy coroner, may immediately proceed to where a body lays and conduct my investigation. I don't need a search warrant. You homicide detectives, step aside, I'm coming in. I don't really do that, but I think I can do that. Okay. But the coroner has a great deal of authority. Government Code 27491.3, this is just sort of interesting. I remind police officers and paramedics of this law. Don't go through the dead people's pockets or wallets. You do not have my permission. That's a no-no. Okay. And 27464, this is the suicide note law. If a suicide note comes across anyone in their travels, that goes to the coroner, not to the police, not to the family. The coroner takes possession of that, and then we will make sure it gets distributed to the right person who it's directed to, legal next to kin or otherwise. Okay? Can we talk? This is something I mentioned to a lot of people. Coroner, we have this authority to investigate cause and manner of death. The state of California empowers us. And one of the things a lot of people come up against when they're trying to find out what someone died from, if they've been sick, if they've been in a hospital. Maybe some of you experienced this, HIPAA. I can't talk to you because of HIPAA. I cannot disclose anything because of HIPAA. Has that been your experience? Anybody? I see some people nodding their heads, oh boy. Well, interestingly enough, for me as a deputy coroner, HIPAA is not a problem because HIPAA regulations specify a covered entity may disclose protected health information to a coroner or medical examiner. So I don't have a problem. My investigators don't have a problem. They say, oh, no, HIPAA, wrong. You may, but notice the friendly word there. I added for emphasis, may disclose, doesn't say you have to. So sometimes we come across agencies, healthcare providers, nursing homes that just don't want to cooperate. They don't want to give us the information we need to investigate the death. But we have something in the law, Government Code Section 5610. This gives us an awful lot of authority. When requested in the course of an investigation by the coroner's office for the purpose of identifying blah, 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 blah. The very end it says, shall be disclosed to the coroner without delay upon request. Okay, that's strong language. No, you need to talk to me right now. I need this information. You don't have time to check with your supervisor. This gives us a bit of authority. We can go out and ask those tough questions if need be. But if we are really coming up across someone who just does not want to cooperate, maybe it's a doctor's office that is prescribing a little too much prescription medication, or people are really afraid they may be in trouble, they are not coughing up the records we need or the information. We do have one more tool in our toolbox. The coroner has its own subpoena power. We can write out our own subpoenas and issue them to whoever. Doesn't go to the court. I carry these with me everywhere I go. They're blank. I just fill out a name and go, here you go, here's your coroner subpoena. Report to the coroner's office tomorrow morning at 5 a.m. with your records and reports in hand. If you fail to show up, I will have a bench warrant issued for your arrest. Have a nice day. So the point is, we have a great deal of discretion and we have a great deal of authority in California. Okay? I'm going to go over these last few things real briefly, and then, of course, at the end I'm going to linger here for a few minutes if anybody wants to ask me anything privately. This comes up once in a while. Health and Safety Code 7100. Who has the authority to claim someone's body? Okay, this comes up in the Health and Safety Code. It's pretty specific. There's a hierarchy of kinship. Starts with, of course, the durable power of attorney, the agent for the deceased, the executive under the probate code, and then the surviving spouse. This is a little dated. It used to say state registered domestic partner. Now, of course, we recognize same-sex marriage, so that's not an issue. Then the sole surviving competent adult child of the deceased, blah, blah, blah. This is all codified. It's not subject to interpretation. We follow this when someone wants to come and claim their loved one. It keeps going down into nieces, nephews, aunts, uncles, and cousins. There's what it looks like on a chart, but here's where things can get a little bit murky. If you have the legal next of kin actually did it. Okay? However, their right to make funeral arrangements, authorize organ donation, burial, cremation, or whatever, that is not severed unless they are charged with first or second degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. And vehicular manslaughter doesn't count. So husband and wife driving, the driver is the husband and is drunk, traffic accident occurs, the wife is the passenger, she dies, the husband is arrested, charged with vehicular manslaughter, he can still control disposition of the remains. Okay, can't be a traffic, has to be first or second degree voluntary manslaughter. That comes up once in a while, particularly with, I know, with parents, and maybe the detectives are really looking at them. Do we have enough evidence? We keep saying, you got to charge them, otherwise they get to decide what happens to the body when we're done with our examination. That makes a lot of detectives really uptight. Okay. How long? Okay, we mentioned this. I mentioned this briefly before. A lot of our cases go county disposition because families can't afford burial or cremation. So we offer them what's called county disposition. They claim to be indigent, or if the body's been in our possession for more than 30 days and they've chosen to abandon, we will do a county cremation. And what happens is we'll cremate, usually within about 4 to 6 weeks, and we take the ashes to the county cemetery and they're stored there for 3 years. Family can come and claim the ashes in those 3 years if they want to. It's not free, costs them a solid $400 or $500. We try and convince them, you know, if you go to a discounted cremation place, look up direct cremation, affordable cremation, you might get it done right now for $500 or $600. But if you want to go the county route, this is what's going to happen. And if they don't claim the ashes within those 3 years, the county will bury them in a common grave site. Every year, the county does a ceremony called the Annual Burial Unclaimed Dead. You can Google that. There's some YouTube videos. There's some good LA Times articles about this. It's kind of a big event. Anybody go to this? Or have you heard of this? Okay. It's East Los Angeles, Evergreen Cemetery. This is where the ceremony takes place. About 10 years ago, this is how many people would show up for the annual burial of unclaimed dead. Usually Don Canabe, a few other things. It was a non-event. Basically, in the ground there where the flowers are, all the unclaimed ashes for 1 year are interred. And it's usually between 1,500 and 1,600 sets. This was 10 years ago. Today, when they have this event once a year, usually in December, it's huge. Media, hundreds of people attend. It's gotten a lot of traction, a lot of people are interested in this. And the county cemetery has all these common grave sites for all the unclaimed ashes, usually anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 sets at each grave site. So I think a lot of your clients probably go down this path. They don't have the wherewithal for a burial. So that's kind of what happens to the unclaimed dead here in Los Angeles. That's my information if anybody ever needs to get a hold of me for any reason. Just kind of in closing, that's my information, my email, my phone number. Myself and the people I work with and who work with me are accessible to all of you as professionals and as ordinary citizens. If you have a question about something, if you want to talk to us, please don't be afraid of us. We talk to the living. So thank you for listening. And as I said, I'm going to be here for a few minutes answering questions. If you have anything privately, don't hesitate. Thank you.